Isabelle always knew she was born to dance. Since childhood, the stage had been her second home, and ballet, her great passion. Every rehearsal was another step toward her dream of becoming a renowned ballerina, and for years, she dedicated herself entirely to her art. Her days were filled with tireless repetitions, perfecting every movement, every leap, every spin. The sacrifice was immense, but the promise of recognition and fulfillment made it all worth it. Her talent took her far. She secured a spot in a prestigious dance company in New York, where she began performing for packed audiences. On stage, she felt free, as if every note of the music guided her into a world where nothing mattered but the movement and expression. The sensation of gliding across the stage, telling stories with her body, was something words could never describe. However, everything changed in the blink of an eye. During an intense rehearsal for one of the most important performances of her career, a wrong move resulted in a severe sprain to her ankle. The pain was immediate, intense, almost unbearable. The doctors were straightforward. The recovery would be long and uncertain. Even with physical therapy and rigorous care, there were no guarantees she would ever dance at the same level again. For someone who had dedicated her entire life to dance, the possibility of never performing again was devastating. In the following months, Isabelle faced one of the hardest periods of her life. The routine that had once been filled with rehearsals, stages, and adrenaline was now reduced to medical appointments and painful exercises to try to regain the strength in her ankle. The world she had known slowly crumbled, and the uncertainty about her future consumed her. Fear crept into her mind, whispering that she might never dance like she once had. The dance company moved on without her. The show she had rehearsed for so long was performed with another dancer in her place, and new productions were created without even mentioning her name. The feeling of being replaced so quickly was an even crueler blow than the injury itself. Isabelle felt forgotten, disposable. Dance, which had once been her greatest source of joy, now became a constant reminder of what she had lost. Without perspective, she found herself forced to seek a new routine. Far from rehearsals and the spotlight of the stage, she tried to find meaning in the monotonous days. Time passed slowly, and every attempt at recovery seemed insufficient. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of failure. New York, once vibrant and full of possibilities, now seemed cold and indifferent. She walked the streets trying to convince herself that there was still hope, but with each limping step, each persistent pain, reality set in. Her future, once so certain and bright, now became a vast emptiness. But fate, always unpredictable, had other plans. Jonathan always knew life on the streets wasn't easy. Growing up in a family of police officers made him understand from an early age the risks and sacrifices that came with the profession. When he decided to follow the same path, he already knew that the job would demand much more than strength and discipline. It would require sacrifices he wasn't always prepared to make. For years, he dedicated himself completely to his career. His protective instinct, coupled with the ability to remain calm in high-risk situations, made him an exemplary professional. But behind the firm stance and absolute commitment to duty, Jonathan carried a burden he couldn't share with anyone. Everything changed the day a routine operation took an unexpected turn. He and his partner were used to dealing with high-risk situations, but nothing had prepared them for what happened that night. A call indicated an ongoing robbery, something that, under normal conditions, could have been resolved with tactical approach and negotiation, but the outcome was tragic. One overlooked detail, a second of hesitation, and the situation spiraled out of control. Jonathan's partner was shot, and despite desperate efforts to save him, he didn't survive. The scene was permanently etched in Jonathan's mind. Guilt consumed him, even though he knew he had followed protocol. Nothing he did could change the past, but it didn't stop the overwhelming feeling that he could have done something differently. Since that night, he became even more withdrawn, diving into work as a futile attempt to silence the ghost that haunted him. The days became filled with long shifts and unceasing missions. The exhausting routine served as a distraction, but deep down, he knew he was only postponing the inevitable, confronting his own feelings. He avoided prolonged conversations with colleagues and turned down invitations for anything not directly related to work. His free time, when it existed, was spent alone, with few interactions beyond the strictly necessary. The streets of New York were a constant scene of chaos and movement, but for Jonathan, everything seemed static. Every patrol, every call, every new assignment only reinforced the sense that he was stuck in an endless cycle. The adrenaline, which had once given him a sense of purpose, now seemed like a cruel reminder of all he had lost. Still, he refused to consider any alternative. The idea of taking time for himself was inconceivable. Stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant reliving that night over and over. So he kept going. He took the worst shifts, the hardest missions, anything that kept him busy. To anyone looking from the outside, Jonathan was a reliable, dedicated cop, someone you could count on. But behind that facade was a man who couldn't allow himself to feel, who avoided any emotional connection for fear of failing again. And so the days dragged on, each one the same as the last, until fate, in an unexpected way, put someone in his path. New York was a constant stage of movement, streets always full, lights that never went out, a city where every corner told a different story. For some, it was where dreams came true. For others, a cruel reminder of all that had been lost. Isabelle and Jonathan walked this city every day, following different paths, yet sharing the same feeling of emptiness. For Isabelle, New York had been the setting for her rise and her fall. The grand theaters and dance studios that had once represented her achievement now seemed unattainable. The streets she once walked with confident steps had become a challenge, each movement carefully calculated to avoid overloading her still recovering ankle. The city remained vibrant, but she felt out of place, as if she no longer belonged to that fast-paced rhythm. For Jonathan, the city was a silent battlefield. Every patrol through the busy avenues kept him alert. Every corner hid stories that would never be told. While New York spun around possibilities and ambitions, he saw only the fragments that needed to be fixed. Crimes to be solved, lives to be protected, threats that never ceased. The city never slept, and neither did he. Even in the grandeur of the lights, there were shadows no one noticed. Amid uncertain steps and lonely patrols, two distinct paths were about to cross, changing both of their destinies forever. The night had fallen over the city, and the lights from the signs reflected in the puddles of water spread across the asphalt. The cold wind cut through the streets, hastening the steps of those still out there. Isabelle, wrapped in her own world of uncertainties, followed a familiar path, but with no defined destination. The routine of physical therapy left her exhausted, and every step required a conscious effort not to overstrain her still fragile ankle. Jonathan finished yet another shift when he noticed the commotion a few meters away. His trained eye caught the scene quickly. A female figure hesitated at the edge of the sidewalk, as a distracted cyclist appeared at high speed. The next moment happened in an almost imperceptible lapse of time. Isabelle lost her balance while avoiding an obstacle on the sidewalk, her ankle failing at the exact moment the bicycle approached. Without thinking, Jonathan moved. In a precise impulse, he reached out, steadying Isabelle's body before she fell directly into the street. The impact of the touch was brief, but enough for them to meet for the first time. Her accelerated breathing and his automatic reflex to check if she was okay created a silent tension in the air. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. Jonathan, always methodical, made sure there were no injuries and stepped back, blending back into the crowd, while Isabelle tried to process what had just happened. Amid the cold of the city, a fleeting encounter left invisible traces on both of their destinies. The days following the unexpected encounter brought subtle changes, almost imperceptible, but little by little, they began to pave a new path for Isabelle and Jonathan. The memory of that moment remained alive, not as an extraordinary event, but as a feeling that refused to disappear. New York continued its frantic pace, but somehow, the two began to cross paths more often. For Isabelle, the walks around the neighborhood had become part of her recovery routine. She avoided the routes that would take her directly to the dance studios she had once attended, but still sought the familiarity of the known streets. It was during one of these walks that, unplanned, she spotted Jonathan again. He was standing across the street, observing the movement around him with that always vigilant expression. Jonathan, in turn, had noticed her presence before she even realized it. His police instinct effortlessly registered the details, the careful way she stepped, the way her attention wandered between the present and the memories she carried. There were no words in that moment, just a brief acknowledgement, a subtle nod that, though simple, marked the beginning of something they didn't yet know how to define. The occasional encounters began to happen more frequently. Sometimes they occurred at the corner cafe, where Isabelle would often stop to rest, other times in the small park near her apartment, where she tried to regain confidence in her movements. Jonathan always seemed to be nearby, not intentionally, but as if fate was insisting on crossing their paths. The initial barrier between them began to dissolve in the simplicity of everyday gestures. Jonathan was not a man of many words, but he showed concern in a discreet way. If he saw her walking with more difficulty, he would slow his own pace without drawing attention. If he found her sitting on a bench, he would always make sure she was okay before going on his way. Isabelle, on the other hand, began to see something beyond his rigid posture, an ever-watchful gaze. She could sense the weight he carried, even though he never spoke of it. Over time, the city began to hold new meanings for both of them. Jonathan showed Isabelle places she had never noticed before, quieter streets where she could walk without haste, hidden little corners that offered a moment of tranquility amidst the urban chaos. In exchange, Isabelle brought something into his life that he hadn't realized was missing, a subtle lightness, a reason to observe the city beyond the constant worry of what might go wrong. The friendship between them did not arise from grand events, but from the constancy of small moments. Amid Isabelle's routine and Jonathan's shifts, a bond formed, discreet and silent, yet strong enough for them to begin noticing that each other's presence was no longer something fleeting. The days went on, but for Isabelle and Jonathan, time seemed to move at a different pace. As much as they had found comfort in each other's presence, they both carried burdens that didn't easily fade. The bond between them grew, but instead of lightening the weight they carried, it seemed to make it even more evident. Isabelle tried to ignore the shadow of fear that had followed her since the accident. Each attempt to return to dance was marked by uncertainty. Her ankle was getting stronger, but her confidence remained fragile. The pain was not just physical. It was the fear that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be the dancer she once was. She forced herself to practice alone, avoiding the studios she once called home. The mirror in her small apartment reflected not only her silhouette, but the doubts that accumulated in her mind. There were moments when she felt progress, when the movements flowed almost like before, but a single failure, a sudden twinge in her ankle, was enough to make everything fall apart. The fear of falling paralyzed her more than the actual pain. Dance, which had always been her greatest passion, was now also her greatest source of frustration. Jonathan noticed Isabelle's internal struggles, even though she didn't speak about them. He saw them in the small gestures, in the way she hesitated before taking a bolder step, in the distant look she wore when she thought no one was watching. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. At the same time, he faced his own ghosts. The weight of guilt followed him every day since the loss of his partner. The memory of that day never completely disappeared. The operation should have been simple, a routine call, but a single second of delay, a wrong choice, and everything changed. He relived that moment countless times, searching for a different scenario, a way to have avoided the inevitable. He threw himself into work as a form of compensation, believing that if he did everything right, maybe one day the feeling of failure would lessen. But it didn't. Isabelle's company brought something different, a breath amidst the constant weight, but it also made him question whether he deserved to be there, allowing himself to feel something beyond guilt. Jonathan's nights were haunted by memories he couldn't shake. The sound of police radios, the smell of smoke and blood, his partner's gaze before everything went dark. Even during peaceful moments, the memory came without warning, bringing with it the suffocating feeling that he had failed. The silence between him and Isabelle was often filled with unspoken feelings. Both understood that the other was struggling, but neither knew how to break through the barrier separating them. Each faced their own internal war, and as close as they were, there was still an invisible distance between them. Isabelle's fear and Jonathan's guilt became part of their relationship, shaping the way they interacted. They both wanted to move forward, but they were trapped in the past. They still didn't know that the answer to their pain might lie in the strength they found in each other. Winter began to show signs of its arrival, and with it came an opportunity Isabelle had never expected. A renowned dance company announced auditions for a special performance, an event that would bring together talent from different parts of the country. It wasn't a permanent position, but it was a unique chance to return to the stage, to prove to herself that she could still be the dancer she had always dreamed of being. The invitation for the audition had come from an old teacher who had been following her recovery from afar. It was the opportunity she had both feared and, at the same time, the only one that could change everything. But the doubt was still there, rooted deep in her chest. What if her ankle failed? What if it wasn't enough? As she dealt with this uncertainty, Jonathan was facing his own storm. A police investigation, which seemed like just another case, was taking on unexpected proportions. The operation involved a dangerous group, and this time, he was at the center of the action. The past was coming back to haunt him, bringing with it the fear of reliving the tragedy that had marked him. The days leading up to Isabelle's audition and Jonathan's operation unfolded like an invisible thread of tension between them. Neither of them spoke directly about their fears, but the weight was evident. Jonathan watched Isabelle practice her movements with obsessive dedication, trying to ignore the pain she felt. She, in turn, noticed his restlessness, the way his expressions grew even more closed, as if he was preparing for something he preferred not to reveal. The night before the audition was marked by a silent farewell. Jonathan received an urgent call informing him that the operation would take place earlier than expected. He left without promises, without guarantees that he would return in time to see Isabelle on stage. The decisive day arrived, and with it came the tension of an uncertain fate. Isabelle prepared for her performance, feeling a mix of adrenaline and fear. Her ankle, despite the occasional pain, seemed to hold up for the challenge. The stage was ready to receive her, but her mind was divided. Jonathan wasn't there, and that unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Jonathan found himself immersed in the chaos of the operation. Every decision required precision. Every movement could mean the success or failure of the mission. He tried to stay focused, but Isabelle's image wouldn't leave his mind. For the first time in years, he realized there was something waiting for him beyond the dark streets and the weight of guilt. The turning point for both of them was approaching. Isabelle needed to face her greatest fear and prove to herself that she was still capable. Jonathan, in turn, had to decide whether he would keep holding on to the past or make space for a different future. And then, as if fate conspired to test them to their limits, something unexpected happened. The muffled sound of footsteps echoed through the narrow alleys. Jonathan kept his breathing steady, senses sharp, every muscle in his body ready to react. The operation, which was supposed to be a precise interception, had turned into an unexpected chaos. The criminal group was more armed and organized than expected, and now he and his team were cornered. The adrenaline coursed through his veins as he quickly analyzed his options. The radios were filled with static and overlapping orders. Amid the chaos, he moved toward the only possible exit, shielding an injured colleague. The scene was a distorted reminder of the past he carried with him. The last time he found himself in this position, it all ended in loss. Fear returned like a sharp blade cutting through his rationality. Meanwhile, at another part of the city, Isabelle felt a growing unease. Already dressed for the audition, her body was there, but her mind kept wandering. The premonition was suffocating, a sense that something was wrong. No matter how hard she tried to push the thoughts away and focus on the stage, a knot tightened in her chest. Back at the operation, Jonathan realized that the only way to ensure the team's safety was by exposing himself. He moved forward without hesitation, covering the retreat of the others. The gunfire echoed around him, the tension turning seconds into eternities. A sudden impact made him lose his balance. A sharp pain shot through his shoulder, but he remained firm. He wouldn't fall here, not this time. Reinforcements finally arrived, ending the confrontation. Jonathan stayed on his feet, his shoulder burning, his body exhausted, but his mind still held captive by the fear that there wouldn't be time for what truly mattered. He had fought to protect his colleagues, but who protected him from himself? Isabelle, unaware of what was happening, stepped onto the stage. Her heart raced, but not just because of the nerves of the performance. There was something more, an absence weighing on her. Jonathan, for his part, refused immediate medical attention. He was bleeding, but not enough to stop him from leaving. He needed to see Isabelle. He had to get to her before it was too late. Jonathan arrived at the theater just before the performance started. His shoulder still hurt, but it was insignificant compared to the urgency he felt. Dried blood stained his shirt, and the tension from the operation still reverberated in his body. But none of that mattered now. He needed to be there. In the wings, Isabelle tried to stay focused. The moment she had waited for so long had finally arrived. The pain in her ankle persisted, but she had trained for this, endured months of uncertainty. and overcome every obstacle, yet something inside her still felt restless. Jonathan walked through the corridor with determined steps. His gaze found Isabelle just moments before she was set to go on stage. There were no words, just a silent exchange of certainty. He was there, injured, exhausted, but present. And in that moment, something within her calmed. The curtain rose. The music filled the theater. Isabelle glided across the stage with the grace she had always had, but now every movement carried a greater weight. Her dance was not just a display of technique. It was a statement of everything she had lived through to get here. Her ankle protested with every turn, but she pushed forward, guided not by the absence of pain, but by the strength she had found within herself. Jonathan watched from the audience, unable to look away. For the first time in a long time, he felt something beyond guilt and the weight of the past. He understood now that the fear of losing couldn't stop him from living. Isabelle was allowing herself to risk everything for what she loved, and he would do the same. The final movement unfolded in a moment, suspended in time. When the music stopped, Isabelle remained still for a second that seemed eternal. Then, the theater erupted in applause. Jonathan stood, feeling that, in some way, that moment wasn't just hers, but theirs. The curtain slowly descended, and Isabelle stood there, in the center of the stage, alone, feeling the warmth of the applause reverberating through the hall. The pain in her ankle still lingered, but it wasn't the same. She felt it, of course, but something inside her had changed. The strength she had found in dancing wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a resilience she hadn't known she had until that moment. She didn't just dance, she surrendered to every movement, to every note of the music. Her mind, usually filled with doubts and uncertainty, had quieted. The stage was her place of freedom. The audience didn't need to know what had happened in the days prior, what she had faced during her recovery, or how the fear of never dancing again had paralyzed her. The moment the music began, all that mattered was the dance. Jonathan watched it all from the audience. He saw her, not just as the dancer he had come to know, but as someone who had fought against her own limits, someone who now shone with the light she had always carried inside her, but had until then kept hidden. The pain and fear hadn't disappeared, but Isabelle had found the courage to overcome them, to show the world who she really was. When the last note was played and silence fell, Isabelle remained in her position, her eyes closed for a brief moment. There, in that moment of stillness, she knew she had fulfilled her mission, not just as a dancer, but as a woman who had risen again in the face of adversity. When the applause began, she heard it, but she also felt an inner peace she hadn't known before. She had won. Jonathan, moved, watched the woman on stage, not just the dancer, but the woman who, through her art, had overcome her own limitations and fears. And he knew in that moment that their battle was just beginning, but that, together, they would be able to face any challenge. Jonathan stood in the audience, his eyes fixed on Isabelle, who was now receiving the applause of the crowd. He felt a lump in his throat, the emotion taking over him unexpectedly. It wasn't just the dance that touched him, but the journey she had taken to get there. The fear, the doubts, the pain. She had overcome it all, and now she shone before him, stronger than ever. He had never imagined he would be capable of feeling something like this. The guilt he had carried for so long, the ghosts of the past that haunted him, seemed smaller in the face of that woman on stage. She hadn't just inspired him, but had also made him see that, despite everything he had lost, there was still something beautiful, something worth fighting for. Isabelle, for her part, was aware of Jonathan's presence in the audience, but her eyes were focused on the horizon, on the crowd, her mind no longer filled with doubts or fears. She knew she had given her best, and somehow, that was enough. When the final curtain fell, Isabelle left the stage and went to the wings. Sweat still dripped from her forehead, but the smile on her face was pure and genuine. She knew her life was at a turning point, that this moment had transformed her. Jonathan was waiting for her at the backstage door, and when he saw her, a surprised smile appeared on his face. He never thought that the simple sight of her, now so calm and fulfilled, would provoke such emotion in his chest. He approached her, slowly, without words. It was as if they both knew that in that moment, everything had changed. He didn't say anything, but the look he exchanged with Isabelle said it all. Words were unnecessary. They had walked together through a path of pain and overcoming, and now they were ready to move forward, not as two separate individuals, but as a single being that completed each other. Their love, forged through challenges, fears, and triumphs, had become the solid foundation on which they would build their future. The love between Isabelle and Jonathan, once wrapped in doubts and insecurities, blossomed unexpectedly, like a dance that, little by little, found its harmony. Both, with their wounds and fears, had discovered that what they feared most wasn't the future, but the simple act of allowing themselves to feel and be vulnerable. By opening up to each other, fear gave way to trust, and pain to overcoming. Their story wasn't made of perfect moments, but of small gestures that revealed what lay beyond the scars. Isabelle, who had once seen dance as a form of escape, now understood that it was also a reflection of her own strength. Jonathan, who had hidden behind the pain of the past, learned to face the future with new eyes, accepting that there are no easy answers to the losses we face. As the city of New York continued to pulse around them, like a metaphor for the vast world they still had ahead of them, what mattered now was what they had found in each other, the ability to heal, to trust, to start again. Their future was open, with no promises of perfection, but with the certainty that together they would be stronger. Life would go on, with its uncertainties and challenges, but now with the confidence that love has the power to transform even the most difficult situations into opportunities for growth and happiness. And so, fate, which had brought them together in a moment of pain, now guided them toward a future full of possibilities, where love and overcoming would be the stars lighting their path.